Hello again, and thank you as always for checking out another one of my battle reports. The last time I did a League game battle report, I just did some written post-game thoughts because it was a pretty straightforward game, but this time I decided to do my normal video. That's because there was a little bit more going on in this game than my last 1,000-point game, and also I discussed the game with Ian afterwards, and he wanted to know what changes he could maybe make to his list or what he could have done differently that would have had a better outcome on the game. So I decided that was worth talking about, worth discussing, and it's a little easier for me to just talk about that instead of write it all out. So we'll start with my play this game. I played pretty straightforward game, pretty solid. The major mistake was moving my war boss outside of the blue unit's range so that they cannot advance and charge. I think if they'd been able to, I definitely would have destroyed that other raider and probably tied up the large witch unit, and then pretty easily killed them because witches don't do super great against orcs for a variety of reasons. But so that was a pretty big gaffe there. Like I said in the battle report, I'm used to running 3 war bosses in 2,000 points, and I'll usually have the special character guy go up and start blowing up some vehicles or like monsters and helping out with some of the bigger targets, while the other war bosses are more on the cheap side and are kind of aura bots until everybody gets stuck in, and then they'll kind of go and reinforce where I need to, maybe help take out vehicles, tie stuff up with charges, that kind of thing. So I was just in that thought process and just made an activation error. Quite a big one, definitely not a mistake I needed to make, but luckily it didn't end up costing me too much. Other than that, pretty forward target prioritization. I definitely made sure to get the relic as quickly as I could because I didn't want any kind of Dark Eldar running away with it or anything like that. They are pretty fragile, but they're also pretty fast, and we played with enough line of sight blocking terrain in this game that it's possible that there could have been some shenanigans or something like that with my units getting tied up and then the witch is just running farther and farther away. So I was like, nope, we'll just nip that in the bud. I'll get the relic, kill that unit. It's only a 5-man witch unit, which is very easy to remove, and then it'll be almost impossible for one of my orc units to get completely killed, and even if it did, it would take so much of the opposing army that I would probably be way up in every other area as well. So shifting gears, we'll move over to the Dark Eldar army. First we'll start with the list. So I mentioned this last time I played against another Dark Eldar player at my store. I do not think Hellions are good. They're they're not super expensive, but they're not real cheap either. They are fast and they have good guns, but they're super paper thin. Like, they have a bad save, they have bad toughness, they only have 1 wound, and there's really no way to fix any of that. Like, you can't buff any of those characteristics. I think you can give them combat drugs for +1 toughness, but even that's not very compelling. So I just don't think they're a great unit. They look really great and they're very thematic, but in terms of actual tabletop power, they're not really what you're looking for. I think Reavers are a better alternative if you're looking for kind of like a fast hit and run style unit. They have not as good of guns, but they are more durable, and they seem to be pretty much as good in combat if you give them the right drugs and all that kind of stuff. So they're a little bit less glass cannon than the Hellions are, and they can more easily make it into combat or do whatever you need to do with them. So if anybody out there is deciding between those two units, I would definitely say go with the Reavers if you have to pick one of them. In a vacuum, I probably wouldn't take either. I prefer having vehicles in Dark Eldar. I think their vehicles are probably their biggest strength, which is kind of weird. Their vehicles are just really good for their points. But if you want to pick between, kind of those thematic units, that's the way I'd go. So I would definitely probably toss the Hellions for another vehicle, like some more bodies, anything like that. Pretty much anything else you're going to get more work out of than those Hellions, in my opinion. They're really good if they get like the charge or something, but that just doesn't seem realistic, and they're such an easy to remove unit that, I mean, even orcs could almost shoot them off the board, and I didn't have very much shooting, and orc shooting isn't particularly good. So if your unit can almost get shot off the board by a unit of shooter boys and a couple miscellaneous characters, they probably have some issues staying alive unless you can hide all of them behind terrain. But that's not as reliable as I would hope it would be. Moving on, I really like the Venom. I really like the Raiders. I think those are like the staples of the Dark Eldar list. They're really fast. They have good guns. They're really cheap. They're surprisingly durable. They have bad toughness, but they have an invulnerable save. Venoms are -1 to hit. Stuff like that. They have Fly Keyword, which is very powerful, obviously, so they can always get where they need to go. They can withdraw and shoot, all that kind of stuff, and they really help out a more elite army by being able to charge things like in the back lines. They can just fly over units, all that kind of stuff, and make it so you don't get shot up quite as badly. I don't think putting witches in a Venom is very good. A 5-man witch unit is just not going to do very much. It's just not enough bodies, not enough attacks, that kind of stuff. The way that it seems to work best is like Trueborn, Cabalite Warriors, stuff like that. Something you can take like a blaster in or some other kind of special weapon and do some shooting out of the top of it. And then when your opponent finally does destroy the Venom, the guys on foot are a decent little distraction unit. They still have a blaster. They can have an agonizer in there, so they can get a decent amount of work done. And it's just kind of, I think, a better fit for that type of vehicle. If you're going to take witches, I think you need 10 minimum. I don't know how big they can be, but with 10 you get the sergeant with a special melee weapon and 2 regular witches with a special melee weapon, and that's really good. Obviously, if you have 10, you can't put a character with them in a raider or something, but if you can find another way to get like a succubus in there with them or something, they become a lot better because reroll 1s to hit is very good with them. Their biggest weakness is that they only have strength 3, so I think they really need the +1 strength combat drugs. This game, I believe they had +1 weapon skill, which is nice. Hitting on 2s or rolling 1s is very reliable, but that's more for if you're playing against like Tau or Guard or something. If you're playing against Orks, Marines, any kind of toughness 4 army, you really need that +1 strength to get any work out of those witches. The other problem with them is they don't really have the volume of attacks that I wish they had. I'm very surprised that they didn't have 2 attacks base and then +1 for their whatever their chainsword is called. It's like some Dark Eldar name. So they don't put out that much damage. They have low strength. They have average weapon skill, low attacks. Not the best options as far as their combat stuff goes. So for a dedicated melee unit, I was pretty underwhelmed by them. I mean, I'd rather have like Incubi or just spam like some of the cheap Dark Eldar characters. Like the Succubus, on the other hand, I was really impressed with. I think the default weapon she has is pretty good, where she hits on 3s and it gives her strength 5, and then like a decent AP. It makes her good at killing units and things like that. It doesn't do multiple damage, so she's not quite a monster killer or anything, but she can get in there and help remove some units, which is something that Dark Eldar I feel like can struggle a little bit with in melee, which is weird to say about them because they're kind of supposed to be, you know, a close range sort of raiding melee firefight army, but I don't know. I haven't looked into them too much. I know they're like big heavy hitter units, but I haven't really like sat down and super examined their codex. So I mean, that's just my impressions. The Archons also seem weird. They don't really do much damage with a Husk Blade. I think giving them an Agonizer is probably the way to go, because strength 3 is just really a big drawback, especially on a combat character. Their main role seems to be just having a 2+ invulnerable save, so they seem to be good at tanking like a big monster, a big character, something like that, where they have, you know, 4 to 6 attacks. They're gonna lose a couple of them here and there from, you know, missing hit attacks and missing wounds, stuff like that, and then you can just, you know, tank that with that 2+ invulnerable save as long as your luck lasts. And they're pretty cheap, so even if it goes down, you're like, whatever, he did his job. I just didn't put any attacks into him this game because I knew that putting Power Claw attacks into a 2+ invulnerable save is pointless, so I was like, I'll just put the attacks into the Succubus because at least she only has a 4+ invulnerable save, even though she had 2 6+ feel no pain saves, one from the army and one from being the warlord. So that was a little bit annoying, but we eventually got her down. Yeah, that's really the bulk of the list. I have to say I probably don't like witches. Like I said, that I just don't think they're worth the cost at the end of the day. They're not terribly expensive, but I have to ask myself what they do. Um, if they're for killing like toughness 3 armies, I mean, you could do that with any of your units. You can do that with your shooting. You know, it's not exactly hard to kill toughness 3 armies for the most part. They have their cool sometimes you can't withdraw rule. Um, but that's really situational. It might become less situational as the game develops and people start playing more like flying and stuff like that. Obviously, flyer spam is already very prevalent, but you can just take a succubus and she has the exact same rule, and then she's just kind of a single model who can you don't have as much invested in as a unit of witches when you put like the special weapons on them and you have to get them a transport and stuff like that. She's just one model. You can split her off. She can go do her own thing, and she's more versatile. So if you're looking for, you know, what the witches are supposed to do, I would just take a succubus or two if it was me. Like I said, they seem really great. I like them a lot. You just ride with the weapon that they come with, and you can give them a blast pistol, and then pretty cheap character, boom, ready to go. Just slap it in a vehicle like a raider or something like that, and she'll kind of figure herself out. Um, Cabalites are probably the better troop choice. They're very versatile in terms of what kind of guns they can take and stuff like that, and they're also very cheap. They're not very durable or anything, obviously, but that's Dark Eldar for you. So I'd rather have those than witches as my troops if it was me. And then there's always the more powerful things that Dark Eldar are known for. With like the jet fighter is one of the better flyers in the game. The homunculus plus Talos plus the whatever the other Talos is called, I don't remember off the top of my head. Package is very good. It absorbs a lot of fire. It's good melee presence. That's where you can get some actual heavy hitting from if you need it, and plus it looks pretty cool in my opinion. So yeah, Dark Eldar seem to be a little boxed in right now. That's kind of how all the armies are working. So I wouldn't say that's like a drawback or bad design on their part. It's just that they have their good units and their bad units like everybody else. So, I mean, if anybody out there can get work out of witches or anything like that, hey, more power to you. But for like a take on all comers list, I think they're a little too niche to not only invest points in, but also to invest a vehicle in, another Raider, another Venom, whatever have you. Um, this list also probably could have used some more, not some more shooting, but like the shooting in different places. So I really like when the anti-tank for Dark Eldar is kind of spread out between vehicles and units, because it makes it very hard to deal with. And Dark Lances are really good. The AP on them is great. They do great damage. You can get access to them very easily. They turn into assault weapons on vehicles, which is extremely powerful. Very thematic for Dark Eldar, but being able to reposition so easily when you're playing with line of sight blocking terrain or anything like that is extremely strong. And then their vehicles, like I said, aren't as paper thin as they look. They're not robust by any means, but they don't just die at the drop of a hat like they may be used to in editions past. And then just kind of having a lot of anti-infantry shooting by taking Cabalites and other units like that just kind of naturally have the basic weapons that'll give you the ability to eat through hordes a little bit. Dealing with a true like Orc horde or Tyrannid horde or what have you, IG horde, is going to always require some more thought and stuff like that in list building. So you kind of have to get a feel for how many Dark Lances is too many. I think right now a lot of Dark Eldar players are running a lot of heavy weapons or anti-tank weapons because the early game is very focused on like, I have a ton of flyers, or I have a ton of like Razorbacks, or I have a ton of just whatever tank. Those armies are very popular right now. They're very easy to play, and they're doing very well. But that's kind of the strength of like a hordes list, is that it runs so counter to that you don't have the tools to deal with it. So like I'm seeing lists with 4 raiders in them, 3 of the Ravagers, I think they're called, the ones that have 3 Dark Lances. And people running like Scourges with Heat Lances, people running Blasters in their units, stuff like that. And it's just like, that's a lot of anti-tank weapons. I mean, you're going to do very well if you run into what you expect to, but you also need to have, some way to counter these high volume, high body units. And I think that the way that that really works is by just taking boring basic troops. Basic troops are almost every army's best answer for just, bog standard bolter shots or las gun fire, just weight of fire. There are exceptions to that, of course. You can run like the really popular Storm Raven list, which just has 2 Hurricane bolters on each one of them. That's a ton of firepower, stuff like assault cannons, stuff like that. But by and large, I think that that's kind of the role of troops, is to deal with other troops, which is I'm okay with that. Seems like a pretty good place to be. So yeah, I mean, that's just something to think about if you're building any kind of list, not just a Dark Eldar list. Moving over to the actual game itself, I think the biggest mistake that was made for the Dark Eldar was moving up too quickly. It was very easy to get turn 1 charges for me, and it probably didn't need to be that easy. I think the Hellions and could have like played at their 18-inch range. The other elements of the army could have played at 18 inches or farther to make sure that they got their optimal shots, but then make it a little harder for me to charge. I move 5 inches plus a d6, and then 2d6 inch charge plus a reroll if needed. So it's not like an impossible charge or anything, but it's certainly more difficult than what I had, which was basically just me strolling into combat and taking out like maybe a third of the army, a quarter of the army, something like that on turn 1. Like, that's just a lot to come back from. I also thought that the large building in the center with a lot of verticality could have been more abused by the Dark Eldar. They have a lot of things that fly. They're very fast, so they can get up there a lot easier. And then it takes me a turn or 2 to move up there, and it's also a smaller surface area, so it's hard for me to bring my numbers to bear. So they could have used that as kind of an effective like shooting platform if they needed to. And it was also where the relic was. So if let's say everything went up there, and then now I have to like climb this tower with all my orcs, and I have to shoot up there and stuff like that. While the Dark Eldar get cover on some of their units, that would have made it a little bit harder of a game for me. Obviously, the Dark Eldar can't run away with the relic very easily because they can't put it into a transport, and they can't move more than 9 inches per turn, I believe. But depending on how it went, I would have to maybe surround the tower, or if I wasn't doing a good job of that, they could try to like smuggle the whoever had the relic out, if it was on a character or something like that. I think the Archon would have been a good carrier for that this game because he didn't really have anything else to do. He didn't have anything good to fight with the equipment he was given, so he could have kind of grabbed that and then ran away. And with the shooting that I have, it would have been a little hard to punch through the 2+ invulnerable, unless luck was with me. But the only other things I have that are fast are like my war boss and my big mech, neither of which are super great at killing him, and it's pretty easy to screen him from smite too. So I think that was a possible way to go. So yeah, that's something I've been seeing a bit, is sometimes when people are also playing like aggressive armies, they get in my face a little bit too quickly. And I think sometimes you have to realize when you're the defender and when you're the aggressor. Orcs are pretty much always the aggressor. They shoot very little, they have a ton of guys, they're very melee oriented. It's really only against like Tyranids where I have to play down to that a little bit sometimes. Dark Eldar are a very aggressive army, but they're also a very mobile army, and I think that was the advantage that they had this game, and that really wasn't exploited as much as it could have been. Instead, they kind of just came at me, and then I was able to use all my advantages, like weight of numbers, weight of attack, stuff like that, and really swing the game very hard into my favor. That's why it ended up looking very one-sided, when I don't think it really had to be as much as one-sided as it was. I definitely feel advantaged against Dark Eldar. Like I said, they typically bring more anti-tank. That's kind of their thing. They don't have a lot of dedicated anti-infantry shooting, and then the things that can take it are not their most common selections. So I think Orks match up very well against them, at least the way I play Orks, which I obviously think is the best way to play Orks. So that's just a little matchup quirk, but it's certainly not like an impossible game or a really, really bad matchup or anything like that. Um, the other, I guess, some smaller mistakes were like putting the Archon into the War Boss. I mean, he ended up doing good damage to the War Boss, but that was on some really lucky rolls. He needs sixes to wound because he's strength 3, so that was I think in most games that wouldn't pan out. The Archon, like I said, he didn't really have anything to do with this game, but he could have. I don't know. Like I said, he could have grabbed the relic, or I feel like he could have gone maybe character hunting or helped out into the unit, just like something where he's a little more useful. Archons don't love fighting against big units of orcs because I can put so many wounds on them that they'll fail the 2++ eventually. But I don't know. It seemed a little bit better than just standing there and fighting the bike warlord and pretty much not doing anything to him. I also think that there was some suboptimal shooting and charging. Like, for example, one turn, all the Dark Eldar shooting went into my blue unit, which was the only unit I had under custom force field. That could have gotten a little more out of shooting one of my other units, worn them down a little bit more, gotten more casualties and things like that. And the blue unit, I mean, it wasn't going anywhere, and it was probably doing the least of any of my units. Like, it wasn't going to be stopped from getting up the ruins and getting to the witch unit that had the objectives. So it's just kind of one of those things you have to deal with. Similarly, I had some characters that were behind my army. At one point, like the jet bikes were able to get behind my lines. I think they could have shot up like some of my characters, charged some of my characters. Most of them aren't very good in combat, with the exception of Grotznik, and they're not super resilient, again, with the exception of Grotznik. So I think taking out maybe like one of those weird boys or something like that could have helped a little bit and would probably have been a little bit more impactful on the game than just killing the regular orc boys, which is what I want my opponent to do. You know, that's kind of the front I'm presenting. Orcs are a very reliant army on their characters, the way I play them at least. So if you can get back and kill those characters, that's usually for the best. Lastly, the oh, as I've mentioned this before, the way to deal with orcs is not to focus down one unit. It's to get a unit so that it's below 20 models, so that it loses the bonus attack, and then move on to another unit, and then kind of just once you have all of them at that stage, then start layering them down so that morale actually does something, because orcs are very immune to morale if you're focusing just one unit down, and that makes it so that you have to spend that much extra shooting, that much extra time actually removing that unit because they're not going to run. There are exceptions to this, obviously, like, you know, if there's a unit that's like really in your face because of like the jump or a transport or something like that, and you have to take it out because it's getting into like your shooting elements or something, then that's different. But you know, if the army is just kind of advancing at you as a front, and we're playing a pretty straightforward, you know, honest quote-unquote game, then I don't like dumping all the shooting into one unit. I like spreading it out and you know, sharing the love, as it were. So that's something that a lot of people do against me. They just focus down one unit, and I've never really seen it work out. So I think that spreading everything around is the better way to go. So yep, those are my thoughts on the game. It was a very enjoyable game. Ian is a really good opponent and someone I enjoyed playing quite a bit. Just a good person to have a game against. I will probably try to get some other games in this week. I would really, really love to play my Tau. They're almost ready. I just have to get some more Pathfinders. Everything else is like pinned and ready to go. So hopefully I can bring some Tau games every once in a while, at least in the near future, while I'm getting them like painted and ready and everything. I have been having problems figuring out how to transport them because I drive a motorcycle. So all my orcs just go in like toolboxes. They're all magnetized, as you can probably see in the pictures. But the Tau don't really work that way, so I have to figure something out as far as being able to transport them to and fro. It's not as important since they're not painted yet, but when they're painted, I don't want them getting thrown around and scuffed up, and their bases also have like some corking and all that kind of stuff that I don't want to break off. So yeah, but I'll figure that out, and yeah, hopefully I can bring you some more 2,000 point games. Next week my league goes to 1,500 points, and so there'll be 2 weeks at that, and then I think we have 2 weeks at 2,000, followed by a tournament. I believe that'll be the first 40K tournament I'm going to. There's none on the horizon that I know about that are that are coming up. Most people are still getting used to the rules and like building their armies and stuff like that. So I think the stores have been a little hesitant to just start running like tournaments right away. But if there's anything else, I'll certainly go to it because I like competing and seeing what's out there, even if I win, lose, or draw. So yep, that's what's coming up for me. Thanks again for watching, and feel free to comment if you have anything to say. I do try to respond to all the comments both on the blog and the videos. So see you next time.